The late afternoon sun stretched across the quiet town of Maplewood, painting golden streaks over rooftops and winding streets. Inside a small, cozy home at the edge of the neighborhood, Emily Carter stood by the kitchen window, watching the light fade against the soft outline of autumn trees. There was something beautiful about this hour, the stillness between day and night, the way it seemed to hold its breath. Yet, for Emily, it was also the loneliest time. The kettle on the stove whistled faintly, pulling her back to the present. She poured herself a cup of tea, wrapping both hands around the warm mug as if holding it could fill the quiet that surrounded her. The house was peaceful, too peaceful sometimes. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant sound of children laughing outside. All the little reminders of life continuing beyond her walls. She glanced toward the hallway, where a row of family photos lined the wall. Her wedding picture, now slightly faded. Her son's first birthday, his face covered in cake. A family vacation from years ago, all smiles and sun. Emily paused at the last frame, her fingertips brushing against the glass. It had been 2 years since her husband Michael had left. There had been no anger, no shouting, just a quiet drifting apart. Like two people standing on opposite shores watching the tide rise between them. Life had moved on, but the ache of his absence still lived in the corners of her days. Now it was just her and Liam, her bright-eyed 10-year-old who filled the house with laughter and questions that never seemed to end. Here's her reason to keep moving forward, her anchor in a world that sometimes felt too heavy. But there were nights when, after Liam fell asleep, Emily sat in that same kitchen, listening to the stillness, wondering if this was all there would ever be. Work, routine, and the soft ache of memories that wouldn't quite fade. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, scattering a few leaves across the yard. It was the kind of evening that invited reflection, gentle, nostalgic, almost cinematic in its stillness. Emily loved this time of year, even if it carried a quiet sadness she couldn't quite name. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Liam's voice echoed down the hall. "Mom, I'm home." Emily smiled as he came running in, backpack half open, a few pencils falling to the floor behind him. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, kneeling to help him gather his things. "How was school today?" "Good," he said, catching his breath. "But I need help with my homework. Mr. Thompson said we have to write about something we learned from our parents." Emily froze for a moment, a small, unexpected lump forming in her throat. "Something you learned from your parents," she repeated softly. "Yeah," Liam said, pulling out a notebook. "Like a life lesson or something that makes us who we are." Emily nodded, smiling to hide the emotion that stirred beneath the surface. "That sounds nice," she said gently. "Let's sit at the table and work on it together." They moved to the kitchen table, the same place where Emily had spent countless evenings helping him with spelling words, math sheets, and science projects. But tonight felt different, slower, quieter. Maybe it was the golden light filtering through the window, or maybe it was the subject of his homework. But something about it made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. Liam sat across from her, tapping his pencil against the page. "Mom, what do you think I've learned from you?" he asked suddenly. Emily smiled, her voice soft. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe patience." He laughed. "You don't like waiting for your coffee to brew?" "That's not patience," she chuckled, shaking her head. "Okay, maybe kindness then." He thought for a moment, his face serious. "I think I've learned how to be strong," he said. "Even when things change." The room fell quiet again. Emily felt her chest tighten with a mixture of pride and tenderness. "That's a good answer," she whispered. But as she watched him write, her thoughts drifted not toward the past, but toward the quiet longing she had tried so hard to ignore. It wasn't just about love or companionship. It was the desire to be seen again, to be understood by someone beyond the role of mother. To share laughter that didn't come from pretending everything was fine. She had buried that part of herself. Long ago, the part that dreamed, that wanted, that believed in beginnings, even after endings. Outside, the sky began to darken, the first stars faint against the deepening blue. Liam yawned, his pencil still moving across the page. Emily leaned back in her chair, her gaze soft on him. her mind wandering somewhere between memory and hope. She didn't know it yet. But that evening, that ordinary night of tea, homework, and gentle conversation was the start of something quietly beautiful. Something that would reveal more about her heart than she ever expected. The clock ticked softly, steady and patient. And in that small kitchen filled with warmth and silence, Emily Carter, who thought she had nothing left to discover, was about to learn that sometimes the greatest lessons come not from what we teach, but from what life quietly teaches us when we least expect it. Later that night, after Liam had gone to bed and the lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow, Emily Carter found herself standing by the window again. The rain had returned, gentle, rhythmic, and strangely comforting. She loved that sound. It had always made her feel both lonely and safe at the same time. She traced a finger along the cold glass, watching the droplets race each other down the pane. Somewhere in that sound and that rhythm of falling water, her memories began to stir quietly, like pages of an old book opening after years untouched. There was a time, years before her marriage, when the world had felt full of possibility. She had been 25 then, working at a small local library, where the scent of paper and old wood seemed to wrap around her like a gentle promise. That was where she met David Miller, a regular visitor who came every Thursday evening to borrow travel books. He never seemed to return on time. He wasn't remarkable in a loud or showy way, but there was kindness in his eyes, the kind that stayed with people. Emily had noticed that the first day he smiled at her over the counter. It was a shy, uncertain smile, yet it carried warmth enough to light the whole room. Their conversations began simply about books, places they wished to see, favorite authors. She remembered how David once told her that he liked the sound of turning pages more than anything on television. Books, he'd said, make silence feel alive. She never forgot that line. Those moments grew into something gentle and unspoken. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, just an ease that felt like breathing. Sometimes they would walk together after the library closed, sharing stories about dreams that seemed too big for their small town. Emily had once told him she wanted to travel, to see the ocean not from a postcard but from the edge of the sand. David had smiled and said, "Maybe one day, when you go, you'll send me a picture so I can pretend I'm there too." She never did. Life moved faster than they realized. One autumn evening, he came in wearing a gray coat and that same quiet smile, though this time it didn't quite reach his eyes. He told her he'd gotten a job offer in another city on opportunity he couldn't turn down. She had congratulated him, told him he deserved it. But when he walked away that night, she felt something inside her go still. They promised to stay in touch, but letters grew few and eventually stopped. Emily often wondered if he still read travel books wherever he was. If he ever thought of the girl who stamped his library card and smiled too long before saying goodbye. Years later, when she met Michael Kind, dependable Michael's her life seemed to find its direction again. He was stable, thoughtful, a man who valued quiet things. Their love grew from companionship rather than sparks, and for a time that felt enough. They built a home, had Liam, and filled their days with the steady rhythm of ordinary joy. But sometimes, when rain fell just like tonight, she would think of the library's warm lights and that soft, unfinished story that never quite faded. Not because she wished to return to it, but because it reminded her of the person she used to be, the one who dreamed without fear. The sound of Liam's soft breathing drifted from the hallway, steady and safe. Emily turned away from the window, setting her mug down on the table. The clock ticked softly in the background, the same rhythm that had followed her through every chapter of her life. She sat down and opened a small wooden box she kept on the bookshelf. Inside were a few old keepsakes' birthday cards, a dried flower from her wedding bouquet, and near the bottom, a yellowed library card with David Miller's name printed faintly across the top. She smiled, shaking her head at her own sentimentality. "You really did forget to return that one," she whispered under her breath. For a long moment, she just sat there, holding that piece of the past, feeling time stretch and fold all at once. She didn't feel regret exactly, more like tenderness. the kind that comes from realizing how deeply even brief connections can mark a life. Emily closed the box carefully and set it back in its place. The rain had softened outside, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and home. Before heading to bed, she peeked into Liam's room. He was fast asleep, his notebook still open beside him. On the top line, he had written, asterisk, asterisk, what I learned from my mom, to be brave even when things change. Asterisk, asterisk, her throat tightened. She kissed his forehead, whispered goodnight, and turned off the light. Back in her room, as she slipped under the covers, the echo of her memories mingled with the quiet sound of rain. It wasn't sadness that filled her heart now, but a gentle peace, the kind that comes from understanding where you've been and realizing you're ready to see what comes next. It was a crisp Thursday afternoon when fate quietly nudged Emily Carter's life in a way she hadn't expected. She had promised Liam she would pick him up from school today, and the walk from the car to the playground was familiar and comforting. The trees swayed gently in the cool breeze, and the golden leaves crunched softly beneath her shoes. As she approached the school gate, she noticed someone standing by the benches, watching the children with a quiet attentiveness that made her pause. He looked familiar, very familiar. David, she whispered, almost afraid to speak the name aloud. He turned, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Time seemed to stretch and fold in on itself. The same warm smile, a little softened by years, met her eyes, and she felt an echo of that old library warmth resurface. Emily, he said, his voice calm, steady, as though no time had passed at all. They stood there for a moment, hesitant, caught between past and present. Around them, children laughed and ran, oblivious to the quiet reunion unfolding on the edge of the playground. Emily noticed the same gentle patience in his gaze, the small movements that hadn't changed the way he adjusted the strap of his bag, the slight tilt of his head when he listened. I didn't expect to see you here, she said finally, her voice soft but steady. David smiled a little shyly. Neither did I. I come by sometimes when my daughter has after-school activities. She goes to the same school as Liam, I think. Emily nodded, feeling her heart lift in a way that surprised her. Yes, Liam is in 4th grade. For a few moments, they walked together along the edge of the playground, keeping a careful distance, yet sharing the small comfort of conversation that flowed naturally, effortlessly, like it had years ago. They talked about the children, school projects, and books they had been reading. Nothing too personal, nothing too revealing, but enough to reconnect, quietly. Like the first brush of sunlight after a long winter, Emily noticed how easy it felt to laugh with him again, how natural the words came, and how her chest, which had often felt heavy with solitude, seemed to lighten with every exchanged thought. It was as though life had given them permission to speak freely again, to acknowledge the parts of themselves that had lingered in memory for so long. Liam ran over, holding his backpack with one hand, smiling brightly at David. Hi, he said, you're Liam's friend? David bent slightly to meet his gaze. Hello, Liam. I'm someone who knows a little about your mom. Liam's smile widened, unbothered by the ambiguity, and Emily couldn't help but chuckle. The innocence of her son had a way of smoothing edges, making moments feel safe and simple again. As the children played nearby, Emily and David found a quiet bench under a tree, their conversation gently shifting to memories neither had spoken of in years. Do you remember the library? Emily asked softly, almost shyly. David's eyes lit up, the faintest laugh escaping him. How could I forget? You always had the most patience when I struggled with overdue books. Emily laughed too, the sound light and melodic. I think you were the only one who ever really enjoyed the overdue notices. You treated them like a small adventure. They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that felt familiar, the kind that reminded them both of shared trust and quiet connection. There was no rush, no expectation, only the gentle return of old emotions, tender and patient. Emily realized that the longing she had carried for years wasn't about romantic excitement, but about feeling understood, about remembering that someone once truly saw her for who she was. And here he was, across the playground, a living echo of a past that never quite left. "I never imagined we'd meet like this," she said finally. Looking at the golden leaves drifting in the breeze, David smiled, his gaze steady and warm. "Life has a funny way of bringing people back together when the timing is right, doesn't it?" Emily nodded. "Yes. Maybe it's right now." The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the playground. Emily felt a quiet hope stirring in her heart. It wasn't loud or urgent, but gentle, the kind that grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, and fills the spaces that had once felt empty. And as she glanced at Liam laughing with his new friend, she understood something important. Sometimes life doesn't return to give you exactly what you once had, but it offers a new beginning, soft, tender, and full of quiet possibilities. That evening, as they walked home together, Emily couldn't stop smiling. Not because of what the past had been, but because of what the present now promised: small moments of connection, laughter, and a gentle rediscovery of hope she hadn't realized she still carried. The following Saturday morning, the sun streamed gently through the kitchen window of Emily Carter's home. The warmth touched the wooden table where Liam was drawing quietly, crayons scattered in a colorful pattern across the surface. Emily sipped her tea, watching him with a soft smile. She felt the quiet weight of the past weeks settle in her chest, the memories, the encounter with David, and the unexpected stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years. She had tried to ignore it, to push it aside, but she couldn't. There was a truth she needed to face. Liam looked up from his drawing. "Mom, are you thinking about something?" Emily chuckled softly. "Maybe, just a little." He studied her for a moment, then grinned. "You been smiling more lately? Is it about Dad?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "No, sweetie. It's about someone I used to know. A friend." Liam tilted his head, curious but unbothered. "Like a story from before I was born." "Exactly," Emily said, smiling. "A story that's coming back to life. A little." After breakfast, Emily stepped outside to the small garden behind the house, where the late morning sun cast dappled shadows across the grass. She had invited David over for tea, nothing formal, just a chance to sit and speak freely, to finally share what had been left unsaid when he arrived. David carried his usual calm presence, his hands tucked casually into his jacket pockets. He smiled as Emily opened the door. "Hi, Emily, thank you for inviting me." "Thank you for coming," she said. I wanted to talk." They sat in the garden, the world around them quiet except for the gentle rustle of leaves. For a while they spoke about everyday things: Liam, school, books, and the small joys that had always marked their connection. But eventually the conversation slowed, and Emily realized it was time to speak the truth she had held back for so long. "David," she began softly, "I've thought about you a lot over the years. Not in a sad way, but in a remembering way. You reminded me of who I was before life got complicated." David's eyes met hers, steady, understanding. "I thought about you too," he admitted. "Even after all the years, I remembered your laughter, the way you saw the world. It stayed with me." A quiet pause followed, filled with all the unspoken words of the past, the missed moments. The distance, the gentle longing neither had acted upon. Emily felt a lightness in admitting her feelings, even if it didn't change the past. "I don't expect anything," she said. "I just wanted you to know the truth, that your presence then and now has meant more than I realized." David nodded, his smile warm and patient. "And I wanted you to know. Seeing you again has reminded me of the same thing. Life took us apart for a reason, but it also brought us back at a time when maybe we can appreciate what we had, quietly and gently." For a moment, they simply sat there, the sunlight soft on their faces, the garden alive with the small hum of life. Words weren't necessary. The honesty in their eyes, the ease of their presence was enough. Later, as Liam ran into the garden chasing a stray butterfly, Emily realized something she hadn't acknowledged before. Happiness didn't always have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it came quietly, in understanding glances, shared memories, and the gentle knowledge that someone truly sees you. Liam came bounding back, his face bright with laughter. Mom, he's nice. Can he come play next week too? Emily laughed, her heart light. Yes, Liam, he can. As David stood to leave, Emily felt a mixture of anticipation and serenity. Thank you for coming today, she said. Thank you for inviting me, he replied. I think this feels right. Quiet, but right. They smiled at each other, the kind of smile that carries respect, warmth, and hope for the future, whatever shape it might take. No promises were made beyond the present moment. Yet it was enough. A beginning of trust, of gentle reconnection, and of knowing that life had brought them together again for a reason. That evening, Emily reflected quietly while tucking Liam into bed. She thought about the past, the choices she had made, and the lessons she had learned, that love and connection could exist in many forms. That longing could be met with understanding rather than regret, and that the heart's quiet stirrings were never wasted, even if they took years to surface. She kissed Liam's forehead and whispered, "Good night, my brave boy." Then she stepped to the window, watching the stars emerge one by one. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt fully present in her own story. There was sadness, yes, but also hope. There was memory, yes, but also the possibility of new beginnings. And in that gentle, unassuming quiet, she understood that life's greatest gifts weren't always loud or dramatic. They were the steady, emotional moments that reminded us who we were, who we loved, and who we could still become.